Any apologies for absence?
Yes, apologies for absence received from Councillor Demir, Councillor Peacock, Councillor Da Costa and Herd Nakania.
Thank you. Any items of urgent business?
No, none received unless there are any any issues relating to the work programme.
Yes, we'll do that at the end of item 10, if that's okay. Any declarations of interest? Councillor Calverwell? No, I will say that I'm a member of the RCN. My sister's a GP in Tottenham. Anyone else got any declarations they wanted to say at the outset? No? Okay, excellent. Any deputations?
No, none received.
So the minutes on pages 1 to 10 were of our last meeting on the 16th of December, which was the budget meeting that we had. There are the minutes. Any points for accuracy? Anyone would like to raise? Anything to actually say about the minutes themselves? Anything coming out from the minutes? I've just got one on page 4, at the bottom of page 4. There was an action and my request that further information be provided to the panel to illustrate different elements of the 2022-23 Adults and Health budget, so that changes to the base budget from 21-22 are made clear. So that's just outstanding, and that we're just going to request that that one gets sent to the panel. For the rest of it, I'm fine. So yeah, we're all happy. Okay, we'll agree the minutes. So we're going to move swiftly on. We've got agenda item 7, but before we do that, I'm just going to ask people on the call who are coming to us on the screen just to let you know, if you could all introduce yourselves as you come on to your agenda item that you're going to speak at. That would be really helpful, just in case there are people listening at home, and they would obviously love to know who you are. So that would be great. So this is the Living Through Lockdown report. This is the council response, and it's pages 31 to 62 was the initial Living Through Lockdown report. There's been a supplementary agenda item just published today at 4:30, which is the council's response to that report. So over to you. So I'm going to look to see who's going to be presenting tonight. Oh, apologies. I went straight into Living Through Lockdown. I got so excited. We've got that report coming. Sorry, I've got Working Towards Mental Health and Wellbeing report first. This was just to keep you all on your toes. You all obviously were going to just go straight in. So this is pages 11 to 30. And this is providing an overview of the Haringey's Great Mental Health Programme, which sounds very exciting. So I'm going to look to officers on the call to actually speak to that report first. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Chantal Fatania, and I'll be speaking to that report. Dominic, are you able to share the slides, please? Thank you. So this was just to provide the panel an update on the Great Mental Health Programme that we have in Haringey. Next slide, please. This is a really ambitious and innovative programme which we launched on World Mental Health Day last year. It comprises of 7 different prevention and promotion programmes which are delivered by different organisations in Haringey, and it comprises of face-to-face and digital support. And we really wanted to build on the existing work that was already going on in the borough as part of this programme. We were really fortunate in that we secured some funding last year from the Better Mental Health Fund, and we were one of 40 local authorities who were successful in achieving funding. So in amongst these programmes, we have Community Protect, which are delivering a range of different wellbeing activities within the community, primarily focused in central and east parts of the borough. And the priority groups for engagement are BAME communities, residents whose first language is not English, homeless people and rough sleepers, people on low-income households, people with autism and learning disabilities, older people and young people who are not in education or employment. In addition to that, we have Mind in Haringey, who are delivering a really innovative bereavement programme, which comprises of a range of different activities, including support champions, grief workshops, support groups, access to qualified counsellors and a telephone support line. This really builds on the work that we've been doing for the past couple of years around bereavement support. We had a strategy and a framework, and this is part of kind of delivery around that. We knew that a lot of Haringey residents lost relatives during the pandemic, both within this country and also in other countries, because of the diverse nature of our resident population. We also have a parenting programme which is being delivered by ABC Parents, who are working with parents who have got children with health conditions and supporting them. In addition, we know that domestic abuse is a big issue in our borough, and we've commissioned a caseworker who will support residents with domestic abuse and their mental health needs, and identify support which can be offered, including writing safety plans and providing information and advocacy on issues such as housing, benefits, legal rights and child protection. Next slide, please. In addition, we're building on the work that's already being done by Connected Communities, and we have recruited community navigators who will work specifically in Northumberland Park to help residents to improve their mental health and well-being and really direct them to support. So this is an outreach programme, and they are working to build a befriending network so that residents who are socially isolated can build connections around common interests such as gardening and reading. We've also got an innovative communications campaign which is really designed to reach a large number of residents when they're looking for support and help them to navigate to our resources website. In addition, we've been working with Good Thinking, which is a digital wellbeing resource which is run across London, and we've been working with them to enhance the digital offer. So there's now specific resources for young people, people who have been bereaved, and lots of really good resources for people of different faiths and beliefs. This is quite new. We didn't have these kind of resources before, and they're free and can be accessed at any time. And these are being promoted in collaboration with Cooth and NHS Go, which again we've been promoting prior to the pandemic in Haringey, but were particularly helpful during the pandemic. Next slide, please. So obviously in Haringey we've been working towards really kind of embedding the Thrive approach, and this slide just really summarises how the activities which are part of the Great Mental Health Programme can be embedded within the Thrive model. So I won't go into this in too much detail, but you know, please do have a look at this slide at a later date. Next slide, please. So as part of this programme last year when we were planning it, we really wanted to host a Great Mental Health Day in Haringey. We started thinking about this last September. We knew that COVID rates were increasing. We thought that winter pressures might be quite high, and we just felt like it could be a difficult winter, and we wanted something positive in the borough early this year. So we worked together with the partners who were all participating in the Great Mental Health Programme to see if there was an appetite to do this, and there was an overwhelming consensus that we should do something. So we decided to host a Great Mental Health Day to raise awareness of the mental health services and community organisations and activities that were available locally, to really challenge the stigma that's associated with mental health and also asking for help, and really try to encourage frank and open conversations about mental health and well-being, and to signpost people. And we really wanted across the borough for there to be different activities that residents could take part in. So we developed a bit of a local comms campaign, and there was good buy-in. We already had our kind of Haringey logo, and then I spoke to colleagues across London, so from Thrive London, Good Thinking, and from other boroughs, to see whether there was interest in hosting this across London, and there was. Next slide, please. So Great Mental Health Day that started in Haringey then became a London-wide initiative, and we were very fortunate. It was promoted by the Mayor of London and other senior leads from across London. Thrive London produced a communications toolkit which was disseminated widely, and Thrive London have got a web page where each borough can populate their activity, and you can see there that it says Great Mental Health in Sutton. That's our logo, and we shared that so that other boroughs could just type their name into it, basically. Next slide, please. So in terms of what happened in Haringey, many of you may have seen or participated in the activities which happened on the day. And as you can just see from this slide, we had a whole host of activities arranged by different organisations. Haringey councillors undertook Thrive London training about how to support their own mental health and that of their constituents. There was a significant amount of co-production. So Bridge Renewal asked people what they wanted, and they said, look, the ladies said we want a pampering session. So they held a pampering session, which was really fun. And all the information about the activities was hosted on our webpage. Next slide, please. So in terms, there were lots and lots of campaign highlights, but I've just tried to summarise them on this slide. There were more than 18 events that were held leading up to and on the day in Haringey, different activities for people of all ages that included face-to-face and online activities. What we know that there were over 337 Haringey residents that interacted with the activities. We think that actually that's an underestimate. Good Thinking launched sleep resources. We developed a YouTube video which was where residents of different ages shared how they achieve good mental health, which was received really well. And just generally, there's been extremely positive feedback about the campaign from senior leads, organisers of activities and residents. It's been described as being much needed, helpful, fun, and just really, really timely. Many residents said it was a really great way to start the year, and they've requested that it be held annually. And I think it really kind of visibly demonstrated to residents that Haringey Council and partners across Haringey are committed to supporting Haringey to be a mentally healthy borough. Next slide, please. And this is just one case study. So Connected Communities engaged with the Latin American Women's Group. And this was a really interesting evening where they spoke about the negative stigmas present in the Latin community, so particularly around the phrase mental health. Many of these women didn't know each other. They made connections and received support, and they really shared deep stories and also how they achieve good well-being. They were able to be signposted to support services. There were provisions in Spanish and Portuguese, and they've created a WhatsApp group, and there's a translator for real-time and future support. So that was just one of many different case studies, and we're producing an impact report which will have more case studies. Next slide, please. And in terms of the London-wide campaign, there were over 60 different events. Oh, the slides have gone. Wondering they.
Sorry, I just needed to let someone into the meeting. I'll put it back up in a sec.
Oh, that's so there were over 60 events, and according Thrive London are also producing a regional report, and our impact report will be embedded within that. But it was one of their most successful campaigns that they've ever had. I think they said it was their second. The website had the second highest amount of traffic that it had. So that was really positive. And across London, there were over 60 separate events. Next slide, please. So an important component of this programme going forward is co-production. So there are a range of each of the programme partners are really trying to incorporate co-production within to enhance their programmes. So Mind and Haringey, for example, are hosting a quarterly steering group, and for delivery partners and interested stakeholders, and that's for listening, and that's, really being used to gain knowledge about how individual community groups experience bereavement, utilise and access services, as well as a sounding board and also peer-to-peer support for champions. And this slide just shows another range of co-production activities. Next slide, please. So in terms of evaluating this programme, we think that's a really important component. And so we will be conducting our own local evaluation of each of the different programme components. In addition, we're really fortunate because we were selected by the National Institute of Health Research, who are going to be evaluating the Community Protect component of our programme, which it's particularly exciting because of their very prominent academic standing. And in addition, we've also been selected as one of the 13 case sites for further evaluation by the Centre for Mental Health. So both Lynette and I've already been interviewed. Lynette will also be interviewed by a colleague from the Centre for Mental Health, as well as a service user, to see how they're benefiting from the programme. So again, that's really, really positive because there were 40 sites that could have potentially been selected. And I think there's only a couple in London at the moment that have been selected, and Haringey is one of them. So, you know, that's really positive as well. Next slide, please. And then finally, just to say that we're going to be working to try and secure funding for this programme, you know, particularly the successful elements, to continue them because it is only currently funded for 1 year. We recognise that prevention is crucial for mental health and that conversations about mental health need to continue, and that ongoing action and advocacy is required to ensure residents can be supported to lead mentally healthy lives. And we will continue to promote resources, services and community-based initiatives. And we're going to carry on working collaboratively across organisational boundaries and disciplines to try and secure place-based improvements that are tailored to local needs and assets, in turn kind of increasing sustainability and the effective use of limited resources. We are hoping to sign up to the Prevention Concordat, which is a national multi-agency collaboration that recognises the merit in taking a prevention-focused approach to mental health. This is something that we as a borough were committed to doing prior to the pandemic, and then the pandemic happened, so it was paused. But now, as part of this work, the Great Mental Health Programme, we would like to sign up to the Prevention Concordat. Many of the northern boroughs in the North and Midlands have already signed up. London, there are less boroughs, but we'd like to be one of the kind of first ones to do that. And that's the end of my presentation, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chantal, and thank you for that presentation. So I'm just going to quickly introduce ourselves, as we'll be asking the questions of you today. So I'm Councillor Pippa Connor and I chair the Adults and Health Scrutiny Committee. And we've got Councillor Blake.
Yeah, Councillor Mark Blake, Woodside Ward.
Councillor Eldridge Caldwell, Stroud Green Ward.
Great, and just to note that we're Concordat. This has been a really interesting report. I'm just going to kick off the questions and I'll open up to everyone else on the... apologies, I forgot to ask Ali to introduce himself. Ali, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, I am Ali Amasiali. I am a Co-op member.
Excellent. Ali, just shout at me next time. You're too polite. Okay, so thank you. I was really impressed that Haringey, this was their initiative and this went London-wide. And I really appreciate the information that you've given us about it. It sounds like it was a very exciting day, the Mental Health Day. I'm going to start off, though, about the Great Mental Health Programme, which looks like a longer initiative. I think you said it was a year. Was that right, Chantal? The money funding for a year.
Yeah.
So, because obviously the council is looking quite closely around co-producing any new initiatives with our residents, and obviously within the Joint Partnership Board, we've got a mental health reference group. So when you first looked at having the money and what you were going to be doing, who was in that co-production group alongside yourselves as officers, as part of, you know, residents or other service users within the mental health community that we know, that was part of that initial thinking process?
So initially, when we were invited to bid for the money, we had about a week and a half to submit a proposal and send it off and apply. So we thought about how we could build really on the existing good work that was happening. And some of our programs were due to finish, so we wanted to kind of continue them, but also work around the theme of mental health. So Community Protect was something which we had seen positive results during the pandemic around delivering messaging around vaccine promotion, and also the COVID messaging, which kept changing, and the funding for that was due to come to an end. So we decided that we wanted to build on that existing structure and the learning that we had and the evaluation to refocus the priority around mental health. So in terms of,
Yeah, so no, I was just going to say, okay, so I completely understand that it was such a tight turnaround. So just to give us a little bit of an understanding, so as this has progressed, which of the service users and other groups are you brought into this as you're going through the process?
Oh, okay, yeah. So obviously we spoke to the Director of Public Health, Beverly Tarker, Director of Adults and Health, our Mental Health Executive and CYP Executive within the council, and separate conversations with kind of Mind in Haringey, Bridge Renewal Trust, and the different partner organisations within a week and a half. So very
yes.
tight.
No, I'm sorry. I think I'm moving away from your week and a half, because I completely understand that would have been completely you know, chaotic otherwise. So no, it just says it's good thinking a co-produced, you know, a good thinking of co-producing culturally competent materials specific to Haringey. So who are good thinking? And that's on page sort of 28. I'm just trying to work out, I mean, is good thinking a group? Are they our residents? Are they our service users?
So Good Thinking are a London-wide initiative. So this is a kind of digital platform which is across London, and it's been developing over a number of years, probably 4 or 5 years now. And they work to co-produce resources with Londoners in general and different kind of national faith-based forums as well. So they've been co-producing not just with Haringey, but also with different faith groups from different parts of London. So like the London Hindu Forum has been involved in supporting them to develop their resources for Hindus. And so if you go onto the platform, there's kind of faith leaders who are delivering messages about mental health and well-being, podcasts from different people from different ethnicities, and the 5 ways of well-being have been tailored to be culturally appropriate with kind of segments from religious texts as well embedded into the resources.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Neves. Did you want to come in at this point?
I just thought I might be helpful here on some general comments around the fact that a lot of our services, excuse me, I've suddenly got a croaky voice now, around the fact that a lot of our services are very much peer informed, and sometimes it's not possible for service users to directly inform them for a range of reasons, or it might not be appropriate, but where it is, they are. And I'd say that a lot of, I mean, I've interacted with some of our teams, for example, who've been working on the Bereavement Network and Suicide Prevention Group, and what they'll be saying to me is they'll be talking to me about that continual, so the feedback that they receive from users around what's working, what doesn't work, a concealer net. And so I think that's how we inform those services and adjust, and often it's quite on that micro level. I've met one of Lynette's team who work on Bereavement Network, and she talked to me really quite candidly about the experiences of some of our residents, particularly during the pandemic, and her own experiences, and how that then informs how the work takes place therapeutically with individuals. So I think that's a kind of more micro example. I think whilst on this broader programme, it wasn't really possible to do what you might like to do, a big co-production piece at the beginning. And I think that's unfortunately a situation we're in often with funding streams, and it's a real challenge and not a place we'd like to be. But nevertheless, I think when we come down to actually the brass tacks of delivering, we're talking to people continuously and we're hearing. So I've been to the suicide prevention group and heard about what the experiences of professionals are in that group, about the people they're seeing, about what we're learning from that, and then what that means about how we adjust and take our services in different ways forward. And I think also the evaluation, I would hope that this evaluation piece will really help us think. It's wonderful. We often talk about having data, having good evaluation. We often don't have the funds or the input into the council to do that, but to have that evaluation to really say, okay, what does that mean about where we go, what works and what doesn't, and what should we tweak? I just thought that some general comments like that might be helpful.
Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you. That's very helpful. So I was just going to say, so going forward with this the project that you're currently doing. So it does say, I mean, we're talking about co-production with partners and service users to facilitate an effective delivery. I completely understand as professionals are talking to people that are, have mental health issues, then obviously that's a constant level of feedback. I'm just wondering if there's anything, and especially around this National Institute for Health Research, when they're going to be looking at the work that you're doing, is there any sort of look from yourselves into now this has started and now this is becoming embedded, and you've got people in place to deliver services that you've just mentioned, to bring in sort of maybe that mental health service users group from the Joint Partnership Board, because that's a resource that we have in Haringey, which we're lucky to have, because those are, they're people that are sort of, got that lived experience. I'm just wondering if there's any idea now to sort of reach out to those people in those communities, and if that's happening already. Apologies, I just didn't maybe see it in the actual presentation. Again, you might be already doing this, so I'm just seeing if I'm teasing that out. Thank you.
I'm going to just hand over to Lynette Charles, CEO of Mind in Haringey, to take this one, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Chantal. And maybe I should introduce myself like so I'm Lynette Charles, CEO of Mind in Haringey, Chair of Mind in London, and Black Thrive Lead. I think maybe presentations don't always do justice to a project or a program that has actually come out of conversations that we absolutely have been having under the Community Protect project that we have been delivering with public health since we were in the pandemic, and definitely since the lockdown. So if you can imagine, Councillor O'Connor, that we have been working with grassroots organisations under Community Protect, so literally alongside them, side by side, as they journeyed initially through the lockdown and then through all the different variations that our government gifted us when we had to change the way that we lived. And what the wonderful thing, and I can definitely speak for Mind in Haringey, that working with those grassroots organisations did, was rather than just co-produce services with them, we were actually with them experiencing things, listening to the feedback, trying to ensure that initially it was about messaging that related to them, overcoming some of the issues that they had accessing GPs, which you would have never thought would have been happening when we were in the midst of the pandemic. Really understanding some of the groups who previously would probably not have gone to the council or even shared some of the things that they were experiencing. I mean, we've worked with groups that are street homeless. We've worked with other grassroots organisations, again, that don't speak English, or English isn't their first language, where not only in our work have we supported them, but we've developed partnerships with them so that we're no longer co-producing, but actually co-delivering services across Haringey. And I think that what's happened with Community Protect is that it's evolved, and it's evolved as the bottom-up approach has meant that those organisations have asked for more and more from us. when Chantel was referring to good thinking and the work going on across London, we have been able to feed into those meetings and the work that the mayor is doing via public health. Lots of the issues that were coming up for the people of Haringey. So not just that we provide things in different languages, because the vast majority of people that come here are not educated enough to even read their own languages. So these were all the things that we found out in that journey. So I think that when Chantel came to us with the idea of the Great Mental Health Programme, we were already crying out for that, because we'd already been working with those groups across the borough who were asking for more appropriate services, more support for their families, more things that represented them, looked like them, were in the language of the people that needed that help. When we refer to our worker who runs the bereavement network in Minding Haringey, she actually speaks a language of the community, which is Portuguese. So we actually deliver that group in Portuguese and in Spanish. So I think we're moving on from not just co-producing, which is really exciting, but actually co-delivering with those groups. So I think that, yeah, hopefully that explains a little bit of the journey, Councillor Connor. So I appreciate we do have groups, but I think on this occasion, there was so much rich information coming from our community at one of the worst times that they had to experience, that we felt we had the information to take the exciting step of galvanizing and coming together to write the Great Mental Health Programme, and how wonderful that it was funded. And now we have a great mental health day across London. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of the essence of how it came about. And if I speak for Minding Haringey, we actually employ people with lived experience. So we don't just refer to service users, we have them as our staff. And hopefully that also gives you the kind of essence of some of this work. And I can only speak for myself as a partner, and I'm sure the other partners would speak as passionately about this programme.
Okay, thank you, Lynette, and that was really helpful. It is hard to convey, and I think that information wasn't in the pack, so I think we were just trying to tease it out and to try and get to understand where and how you're co-producing. So I've got Councillor Mark Blake like to ask a question.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it's just it's very interesting. Is this funded by the Mayor of London? No, it's funded by national government, the NHS?
It's the Better Mental Health Fund.
Okay. So that's a central government are funding it?
Yes, it's funded by Public Health England and our Office of Health Improvement. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's helpful. Thanks. Yeah, just a couple of observations, really. One, obviously, it's just a year. That's a real shame. And I think any challenge, and anyone who's been around this sort of space and these sort of challenges to, get outcomes from a programme like this that can then be mainstreamed and kind of influence things in the future is very tough. So I don't want to sound flippant, but I just think that's about kind of being realistic. Apologies, I was late for this meeting. Thursdays I work in a prison system, and I'm afraid it's a message that I always kind of say whenever the issue of mental health comes up, is that the prison system for some of our communities is an alternative pathway to them around mental health. And I've spent quite a bit of time in the prison system over the last 18 months, and I see it on a day-to-day basis. And well, on a week, I'm in there once a week. I see that sort of quite regularly, and I've met a few of our residents in there. So obviously that's not mentioned here, and I think, personally that's a shame, because I think in terms of, if I look at some of the challenges locally that we have, particularly around in the criminal justice area, around sort of serious youth violence, and that interface doesn't, for me, just get scant recognition, I think, in terms of what I see in terms of mental health policy development. The other point that I'd say as well, which is kind of partly linked to that, is around it's good that one of the identified groups were neat young people, but there has been another, just another kind of drum that I've tapped for my time on the council, but is the issue around children adult mental health services and their accessibility, particularly for Black communities. I've had some experience with those services, I think there's a great deal that needs to be done, and I hope that work is going on somewhere else. I'm not convinced, I've never been convinced all the time I've been on the council in terms of how seriously that's been taken. I wait to be convinced. Last point that I'd say is that a big issue which isn't dealt with here, but I hope it's being dealt with somewhere else, is around, and it relates in terms of accessibility of services, is around organisational culture. And we see that demonstrated to a huge extent in terms of what's going on around policing at the moment, and the whole interface, I think, in terms of diversity and inclusion. My hope is mental health services and health services generally, and the council generally, is kind of learning lessons from that experience, that long, sorry, hard experience in terms of policing. Thanks.
Okay, I think those were points to note rather than answers to be. Okay, so just Councillor Carvewell, yes, you'd like to ask some questions.
This is a question to Mark, actually. He says, lessons learned. In view of the ever-changing issues in the world, now we have the COVID, and things are constantly changing. The lessons learned, do they become applicable, say, in 5-10 years' time, or are they massaged to try and manage the issues of that time, say in 5-10 years' time? Am I making sense?
Councillor Carvewell, that's a very large question. You're not really supposed to be asking your fellow panel members at this point. You are supposed to be scrutinising the report. If Councillor Blake would like to come back with a little response to that, but any questions to the report would be.
Okay, leave that one then, Mark.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so a couple of last quick questions. There's a big community mental health review going on across the 5 boroughs in North Central London. So how does this work alongside that community health review? Does the research and the information that you're getting through the National Institute for Health Research, will that be fed into the community health review? And a little bit about that. And then the final bit here, there was a lot about preventative work, which I think is key. And I think, as my fellow councillors have sort of said, that getting in at an early age. So I didn't really see much about schools. Now, again, as Councillor Blake has said, there might be other stuff happening, and it's just not part of this. But I think when we're talking about prevention, the work around support for young people within the school system, I think is quite fundamental. And I do know that at the moment, I think it's through the Trailblazer initiative, that there is funding, but only for the east of the borough. And I think there's just a question to yourselves as professionals. We all know that mental health doesn't stop on a border. It doesn't say, oh, well, you live on that side of the street, on the other side, oh, you're fine, and I know that's been flippant, and I don't mean to be, but I think I'm just trying to really, I think I get quite upset that children across the whole borough, and there are children within deprived areas across the whole borough here, and actually just with mental health issues. And I've been talking to heads of schools, and they are just beside themselves because in the West, they don't have any additional resources to fund for any sort of counselling for the young people. So I'm just wondering, as part of this project, is there anything that you're doing alongside young people, or is there something that you would be looking to sort of move, forward with, or ask for more resources for our young people across the whole of the borough as a result of the work that you're currently doing with this initiative? Thank you. Okay, I've got Chantal, Lynette, or Will. Either three of you'd like to come in on that question?
So I'll start with the community services, the community mental health review. So that is not explicitly linked at the moment. So that is a link that we can make and try and feed into that. I think I kind of links to Councillor Blake's comment as well. It's just the kind of scope of the programme. So it's limited funding and is very focused on sort of broad community-based prevention. And clearly there are lots of other challenges, not just in Haringey, but nationally and London wide around mental health service provision. You make a really good point around schools and children and young people. I think Charlotte might be able to come in on that. But this, I think we're looking at a specific small programme of funding, and we're talking about broader issues. And of course, we want to do more in all of those areas. And you make a really good point around challenges, particularly with COVID has exacerbated those challenges in mental health in young people. And it's not just in the east of the borough. We've got things like Cooth, which is a resource available to all. We're doing lots of work with CAMS. So Charlotte, I don't know if you want to add anything on the children's point, but of course we want to do more, and we see that as an area of where there's gaps.
Thanks, Will, and thanks, Councillor Connor, for the question. Yes, we have in our children and young people's mental health and wellbeing transformation plan, we've identified the expansion of that offer into schools as across the borough as a really important element for us. All our mental health support in school is also subject to policy changes, so it's set out in the long-term plan. It's part of the emerging core offer from the mental health services review, so it's identified as a key priority, and I think everybody is working to ensure that it is resourced adequately for the reasons that you've said. It's a really important part of prevention and early intervention, also really important as part of a non-stigmatizing sort of universal offer, and then really important that we bring parents into the loop as well, and we found that schools are a good mechanism for that, for the trailblazers that we have. So just to say, it is a priority. We're working hard to try and get it across schools, and indeed across North Central London we've got differential positions between the different boroughs, and really keen that we have a single approach. So yeah, but we're working on it, Councillor Connor, not quite there yet.
Is it okay if I come in, actually?
Yes, Lynette, that's fine. Sorry, Charlotte, just to let you know, there's a bit of echo on your line. I think we heard what you said, Charlotte, but I think there's quite a lot of echo this end. I'm sure, hopefully it's been picked up well on the recording, but just to let you know, sorry, Lynette, yes, over to you.
I was just going to add to what Charlotte says, because obviously as Mindy and Haringey, we sit both on the CAMS board and the adult mental health. And I think that it would be great to have that level of investment come into CAMS and for the schools to get the support that they need. I think it kind of goes back to Councillor Blake's point. The vast majority of children in this borough come from diverse backgrounds with different ideas about what mental health is, even when they go to school and asking for help. And actually, when we look at that Thrive model, it's really about understanding at what point and what help do people need. And that sometimes the journey to help means that we have to motivate people to get the help that obviously we think that we need. And as a charity, we can be quite creative in trying to meet the needs or the gaps that might be in services. So when I think about the Haringey Wellbeing Network that we deliver, which is the community mental health front door, we have actually worked with Temi. From April onwards, we are going to increase our offer to young people who are transitioning, because often what we find is when they leave CAMS, there isn't any support for them, and then we just wait for their mental health to worsen before they get any support. So we will have 2 workers from April working specifically with those transitioning, and then our young people that are transitioning out of care. And if Councillor Blake is in prisons, then he will know that a lot of children in care actually end up in the prison system, obviously, and sometimes because we have failed them in looking out for their mental health. And in any way we can, because of the different forums that Mind in Haringey is in, we are informed by those forums and where the gaps may be. I totally take Councillor Blake's point about prisons and why a lot of our population or our community are there. And I think, Councillor Blake, if you like, I think there's an opportunity for us to talk about that outside of this meeting and see what we can do. But I think everybody is aware that there needs to be more mental health services. And I think all of us on this call, Chantel, Will, etc., we're really hoping that mental health transformation really makes a difference. We've been waiting many years for there to be an investment in mental health and for us to have parity of esteem. And we really hope that is coming. And we totally acknowledge all of those concerns about some of the people in the borough that might live in the West that are often forgotten because they don't live in the part that we feel is the most deprived. And I hope that helps a little bit. But absolutely, we want to meet those needs in any way we can. And partnerships are a really good way of us doing that.
Okay, thank you very much. And that was really helpful to get that additional sort of information and understanding around the initiative that you've brought to us today. I'm just checking with my fellow councillors. No further questions. And Ali, I'm just going to check with you in case you have a final question to ask.
That's fine.
Lovely, thank you. Then as a panel, I think we're happy to note the report, and a recommendation, I think, from the panel is around future projects. And admittedly, we're not expecting you to do everything in one thing, and we are, it is great to see all the initiatives and the work that you've currently done, especially around that great mental health day. So, very well done on that. But just if there's a recommendation from the panel is around looking at the sort of the offer for all children and young people. And I like specifically the understanding about that transition bit, because I think that is a huge gap and people in care. And I think as Councillor Blake has highlighted, there's definitely some gaps there. So I'm sure, I'm not going to speak for him, but I'm sure he might have that conversation with you outside of the panel. Okay, so thank you very much for the report and thank you for coming to us today. But that's all we have time for this. So we're going to stop there, but thank you very much for coming. And then we're going to move on to living through lockdown, agenda item 8. So as I said, in the pack, we have the actual living through lockdown report. And then we've got as a supplementary that came through earlier, or this afternoon, is the council's response to the living through lockdown report. And I think I've got Charlotte to talk to that agenda item. So over to you, Charlotte.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I'm bringing apologies from Helena Carnier because it's actually a joint response, as it were, from the council and the Joint Partnership Board. So we had a working group, which, as is set out in the report, we are intending to continue. Not solely, largely because although the report, the recommendations of the report reflect back on the first lockdown and the experience of residents during the lockdown, particularly vulnerable residents, they also make some really important comments about how services are delivered, the things that are important to people, and therefore we feel that the working group needs to continue. We will be making this report in effect to the Joint Partnership Board and then asking them how they would like to continue the work that we've started through the co-production group. So just to say, the co-production group involves members from across the Joint Partnership Board from the different reference groups. It's chaired by Helena Carnier, and real apologies from her that she can't be with us this evening. I think she was going to try and log on, but I'm guessing from the fact that I can't see her on the list that she's not been able to. I suppose the first thing to say is that the Living Through Lockdown report has been an incredibly important report across the council and with partners in capturing the experience of people, particularly with additional needs and vulnerabilities during that first lockdown, which now, as we come into what we hope is the final phase of the pandemic, but we're not entirely sure will be. It's quite shocking to read back and recall just the abruptness of the first lockdown, the sort of seriousness of the sort of change in all our lives, and I think it's quite timely to sort of reflect back and think what does that mean for the way that we respond. What I'm proposing to do is just work through the headlines on the table, which is a table of recommendations that we as the working group pulled out from the report. Some of them we've done more work on than others. I haven't sort of updated the NHS ones, although we've been talking to the NHS as part of the working group because we haven't had a chance to get to that detail yet. So if that's okay, Chair, is that all right to run through the sort of heading wise? Is that what you have?
Yes, and particularly because I understand this is a co-produced piece of work. So I think just at the outset, and apologies, it might just be the echo on your line. If you could just sort of explain to us a little bit more about the meetings, you know, how many you've been able to have, who's been on the panel, how, you know, is this an official panel with like terms of reference? You know, do you just have minutes and actions? Give us a flavour of this actual co-production in process, if you like, and then yeah, the headlines would be lovely.
Okay, thank you. So the group is chaired by Helena Carnio, who's one of the co-chairs of the Joint Partnership Board and well known to you as a co-optee on the panel. We do have minutes taken by Public Voice, previously by Val, and it will be by Rachel going forward. We've met a number of times. I don't think I can tell you how many. I'm not sure that we've got terms of reference, but we follow basically the agreed approach was that we would work through the report. There were clear recommendations in each section that we would work through a response to the recommendations and try to engage the wider Joint Partnership Board in that work. The proposal is that we carry on doing that. And the membership of the working group, it cuts across the different working groups, the different reference groups, sorry, of the Joint Partnership Board, and so probably in total are about 8 people who attend the working group. Does that answer your questions? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Great. And just from an officer point of view, we've had a couple of officers from the council, a CCG employee, and I think what we want to do is then bring back some of the discussions to the Joint Partnership Board. So you'll notice, for example, on some of the issues around parks, around parking, indeed, and housing, our proposal is that these are not things that we can sort of wrap up, as it were, because they're quite big comments about our allocations policy, about how we operate in times of pressure around evictions, about our accessibility of our parks, and whether there's a suggestion that at certain points parks should be reserved for vulnerable users, for example, whether we want to look at issues like safety, particularly of disabled and older people, and we know we're doing a huge amount of work on women's safety in parks. So there are some things that are bigger than the group, and our proposal is that we will take those through the Joint Partnership Board with the inviting the relevant officers from the council to work on that, and we've got a number of opportunities to do that with work underway in the council on those areas. So Dominic, are you able to share, or shall I share? I don't mind.
Whichever you prefer, I don't mind.
Okay, I'll do that, but it will limit me on what I can see. Wait, I'm struggling to find my company. Sorry, just a second. Dominic, sorry, would you do it, please? I can't. Oh, well, here we go.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to find it at the moment. I'll just
sorry, I think it's here. Okay, you've got it. Okay, lovely. Thank you.
Let me know which page number you'd like.
Can we start at the top?
Yeah, is that the right one?
Yes, thank you. So is that okay for echo? I think you might need to mute. Thank you. So on the first section is communication. So obviously this was really critical during the first lockdown and indeed throughout. I think both all the comments made were really relevant and obviously grew out of people's experience. I think we've done a significant amount of work both within the council and with the NHS around both digital communication, also investing in areas like our Community Protect network, our community newsroom, having much more standard translation into community languages, doing a lot more work on Easy Read. So this was an area where the group and ourselves felt that we've made some significant progress. Clearly, we want this to be embedded in the way that the council communicates more generally, that we are looking at ensuring that we try and keep a sort of digital offer going, and we've certainly managed to do that in a number of areas in response to residents' wishes. We are, I think, gradually moving more and more to face-to-face access, but we know in the NHS and indeed across the council that use of telephony and digital, and we're an example this evening, aren't we, of a sort of hybrid model seems to be here with us for the long term. So really making sure that we're focusing on digital inclusion, that we're focusing on different ways of communicating, using community languages, using our local residents in terms of community champions, and having a mixed offer throughout. So that's our main response on communication. And I suppose one of the things is about constantly checking with residents that we have got the right routes to communication. We're just talking this afternoon, for example, with our Eastern European residents about the situation in Ukraine, and actually making sure that we've got those right routes into those communities is an important, really vital first step. And that was felt very much from the Joint Partnership Board too. Can we move on, Dominic, to the next slide?
Sorry, Charlotte, can we just ask some questions on that page?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So I'm just going to ask, and this is having spoken to Helena before tonight, and we were just discussing the agenda for tonight. So one of the things that sort of came up was around the communication and understanding what's happening at what point. We've also, because we've been doing the Scrutiny panel's been doing its work into the projects that we have been on commissioning and co-production. A lot of the feedback has been around the problem with communication with the council, in as much as service users saying they're not really sure what's happening and they don't really find that they have got access to information in a way that they would like, so around certain groups or activities, etc. So I'm just asking, you're saying on the council's web pages have been updated on a regular basis, and you said on the providing digital and face-to-face access to services that you're recognising that there's a change. I mean, there's a lot of this that sort of is, you know, what's new from the Living Through Lockdown report, or the fact that these issues were raised? What's new that's come out as a result of that, and new initiatives that you want to tell us about in this first section?
Well, I think that's one of the challenges with this whole report, that it's more about ways of working. So there aren't necessarily new initiatives. I think what we did during lockdown and with pandemic was recognise fully the importance of communicating really widely. We've had a much snappier, faster response on communication. We've invested in translation and community languages, invested in areas like our community champions to get messages out. So I think those models of communicating are what's been standard, and I don't think I can point to that's not the way that this has worked, and we've talked about it at quite length in the working group, that these are really sort of long-standing ways that we need to shift the ways that we communicate. We're doing quite a lot of work on that in the council. The sort of emphasis on co-production, on involving people earlier, on giving information as soon as we can. Those are all elements of it, but there's not a programme, there's not an initiative. I think it's more about us understanding our local communities better, being able to access and get information across to them sooner. We're not always we don't always get it right. We absolutely accept that. But I think one of the things that, and we've recognised that in a number of areas recently. So I think it's more about the ways that we work and making sure that our communication is timely and responsive to our local communities.
Okay, so when you've been in this co-production meeting with all the different service users in order to do the response and next steps to this report, what challenges have they brought to you, and what have you been able to put in progress in order? I noticed you said that you've got a new community champions. Is there anything else? I mean, what challenge? I think what I'm missing from here is the challenges that, the bounce back between, yourselves and the group, and really understanding how that challenge has been, acknowledged and maybe not able to do anything about because of resources, or acknowledged and actually then something has changed as a result of it. I understand what you're saying here, but this sounds more like what the council was doing anyway. I'm just trying to just to see if I can get a feel from the specific co-production group that you've been involved in, if there's anything specific coming out of that or not. Thanks.
Well, I think the report was written, as you know, during April and August, produced in August 2020, arising from the experience of people from April to August. So a significant change was effected during that first lockdown in terms of how we communicated in response. And one of the things, as part of our sort of continuous sort of recovery and renewal work, which has taken place at various points and then had to dip back again as the COVID variants have come through, has been about sort of making sure that we respond to these themes. So I think communication, I mean, it's an evidently important issue. And I think, Councillor Blake was referencing it earlier in relation to our sort of accessibility of mental health services, for example, and communication about what is available and how you access it is one of the first areas. So I suppose this has been about, we made several changes quite early on in the pandemic about our communications. We had additional people working on communications. We had very fast moving situation which we responded to, and I think a lot of that has fed into what we're doing as a result. So I hope that answers the question, but I think that one of the challenges with working on this sort of living lockdown report has been how things happen at a point in time and then how they actually become a way of working. And that's in effect what we're trying to reflect here. Is not that we haven't had a huge arguments, as it were, in the co-production working group. It's been more about, well, have things improved on communication? Yes, there are still some challenges, but how do we work? How do we use some of what was learned during the lockdown to respond? So I'm sorry, I can't create something that wasn't there, Councillor Connor, in the group.
Okay, no, it was fine. I was just interested to see how co-production was working and what changed as a result of you co-producing this alongside service users. And I think just trying to understand that flavour, because obviously these reports can be very sort of, it reads more like a normal council report, if that makes sense, rather than input from service users. But I'll take your point and we'll move on. So if we go into the next section around the default financial assistance, and then the care assessment and annual reviews. Thank you.
I'm going to bring in, Beverly had her hand up there, so Councillor Connor, I don't know if you saw that from the room.
I can't see anything from here, I'm afraid.
Okay.
So it's good to sort of shout out. Sorry.
Okay, so Beverly.
So you said Beverly. Beverly, did you want to come in?
Yes, thanks very much, and Councillor Connor. I suppose I just wanted to add the fact that we haven't arrived yet. I think is illustrative of the fact that we're on a journey in terms of responding to the communication issues that have been raised through the Living Through Lockdown report. But I think we've certainly presented to Scrutiny on previous occasions how we are working towards that sort of localities-based approach, where we are present in our communities with residents, we know about what's available in a particular neighborhood or area, and we're actually physically present there to be able to have that, very live sort of interchange with residents within a community. I think the previous example about the mental health wellbeing work was an excellent example of how we're able to actually outreach and work with communities that we probably wouldn't have reached before COVID in very different ways, building on the foundations that we've had with the Community Protects, for example. And Chantel and Lynette sort of illustrated some examples. So I think there is just something around understanding that it is a journey that we're on, but acknowledging that there are some milestones. And I think what would be useful, certainly for Scrutiny, is for us to come back at a later stage as these sort of initiatives or approaches develop, to update you on how far we've got, because it's very iterative from my understanding, it's very iterative. If we're going to be responsive to our communities, we've got to sort of walk alongside them, and we're still very much on that journey. So I suppose that was just the overview that I really wanted to make, and I'm sure Charlotte would agree. We'd be very happy to come back to Scrutiny to update you on how some of those initiatives are progressing. Thanks.
Thank you, Beverly. And yes, I think that would be really helpful, maybe sort of September time around getting, and I think it's for the next report, I think it's just because we're really excited about this new way of co-producing things alongside service users. So I think it's getting that flavour from the report would be really helpful as well, and just understanding the challenges within that. We are not expecting this to be smooth and easy, progress. But we are looking to see what the challenges were, and then what new initiatives could be put in place, all working alongside with others, as you said, Beverly, with different cohorts of people that we've now engaged, or in different communities. I think that's really exciting. So if that could be brought into a future report, that would be really helpful. Councillor Blake.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a quick point to add to that. I think it'd be just really useful to know where the service user engagement has changed thinking of officers, or challenged thinking of officers. I think that's all part of the process, and I think the more that you inform us about that, the more that we can then value the process, because I think, as the Chair said, you read through this, it doesn't give that sense. There are no, for example, quotes in terms of what service users directly said. So I think in terms of building credibility in terms of this process, I think certainly for me, I really want to know where that, we thought this, but then we spoke to the service user and actually, oh wow, actually that isn't the most important thing to do. We found something else. That's the kind of thing that I think, and particularly in terms of thinking about, how we present these processes outside of the council's walls, if you like, out to the community, that it kind of demonstrates we're open for that challenge. We're open to be shifted, open to have our thinking shifted. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Blake.
Okay,
that's really helpful. But in response, I suppose we'd seen the whole of the Living Through Lockdown report in that tenor, basically. So basically that was a really, really powerful voice of residents and carers and users saying, this is our experience and these are the things that you need to change as a result of that. And so I think our response, and the report was widely shared across the council. It was presented at our Haringey Gold, it was presented at our Gold Partners, it was presented across a whole range of forums across the council, endorsed by the council, was that this is really important and people need to hear these voices going through. So I don't think there was any, so all of this has been as a result of the voice coming through, if you see what I mean. So it's, as Beverly said, there was that very powerful voice, and then this is iterating what has been possible as a result. So I'm sorry if that flavour isn't coming through, but I think it is important. That's why we wanted to remind people that the original Living Through Lockdown report, because that is sort of where the power of the voice really lies.
So thank you, Charlotte. And I think you've just raised exactly the point. I think the actual first report was really, powerful because it was really, you could hear the voice of our residents in that and service users. And I think as Councillor Blake, it just lacks that flavour when we're getting the update. But I fully accept that these are works in progress. And we look forward to, in September, getting the update with all the extra bits that I think gives us that confidence that we're really hearing the voice of our residents within this report and the challenges to us as a council on how we can, and then sometimes cannot respond, and change things, and it is that challenge. But we'll leave that part there because I think we've discussed that part. So we'll go on to page 2 of this report with the default finance assistance and the care assessments. So if you'd just like to carry on, thank you, Charlotte.
Yeah, so I think the default financial assistance is probably an area where, actually, sorry, Dominic, do you just want to roll back a little bit? Yeah, so that one, which is at the top of the first section. But there was this sense that there should be an automatic sort of suspension of various issues, the default financial assistance. I think this is possible in some areas, but not in all, largely because those are linked to a means assessment, and it was difficult to agree this universally, and certainly looking forward, it's hard to imagine. And we were having conversations about scenario planning because it's easier to sort of see this looking back in terms of the pandemic, but in terms of looking forward as to in what situation this would arise. In some areas, obviously, there was that approach. So the DHSC, Department for Health and Social Care, sort of removed the requirement for client contributions to social care packages, so that was a universal blanket response which affected us directly, and I suppose that's an example where that default financial assistance, people didn't have to apply for a change, that was just implemented. That is quite rare for us to be able to do, and I suppose one of the things we've been teasing out is in what circumstances would we want to be able to do that going forward, and can we set any sort of criteria around that for anything that isn't a sort of hopefully an unusual phenomenon like a pandemic. So I think that's one of the areas that hopefully you get a sort of sense that it's hard to imagine forward a different scenario which might lead to this happening. We recognise that in the scenario that would have been helpful, and where it was made possible for us to do that, either because we got funding or because it was a universal requirement set by central government, we did obviously implement those areas. Just on the care assessment and annual reviews, I guess the main area that I'd want to bring out is that non-digital routes to care and assessment, and that real focus on having both face-to-face and digital. I think it's a bit of a theme living through lockdown reports that we recognise that some residents were not able to access digitally, and even if they had been able to access digitally, would not have wanted to access digitally, and that is really important for some of our statutory processes and for some of, obviously, frontline services, they remain frontline and face-to-face. And I think that's been a real, that is a challenge to manage both, and I think we're probably coming through and into a slightly different scenario of challenge now, which we've been discussing, where actually it's hard if we're really focusing on a face-to-face offer, how do we maintain a digital offer as well? So I think there's something, it's almost like the other balancing question that we're asking ourselves, instead of can we have some face-to-face alongside a largely digital offer, to what extent can we manage a digital offer alongside a largely face-to-face offer? So that's something we're teasing out, and that is a challenge. And I think as COVID restrictions have obviously largely disappeared, and one of the discussions we've been having, and we had at our Community Health and Care Advisory Board on Monday night, was to what extent are we, are people comfortable to access services face to face, and how do we sort of reduce anxiety, make sure that people don't feel socially isolated? So this is a real area of live debate, if I can convey some of that for the working group, and something that we're really trying to tease out in relation to developing services. Just working with people's anxiety, and also working with trying to return to sort of what feels like normality.
Thank you, Charlotte. So when you say this could sometimes be a strain on services with care assessments, are you having any issues at the moment with being able to do the care assessments within the time required? And if that is that because you would need more resources, more people to go in to be able to assess? Sorry, someone's hand's come up and I generally can't see who that is from here.
Beverly,
So
so I'm going
please
to bring in
shout out.
Beverly before I come back. Beverly. Okay, Beverly.
Okay, Beverly, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Councillor Connor. I suppose I just wanted to make the point, which is not specific to Haringey, but it is national, and ADAS is certainly collating information about it. Because of our response to COVID, so there have been delays in social care assessments. That's a fact. I mean, very often in the news we hear about the NHS waiting list. What isn't such a high profile is the social care waiting list. And certainly there are waiting lists for social care assessments, there are waiting lists for OT assessments, and there is significant backlogs. That is part of the argument we're trying to make to central government for appropriate funding for social care. Obviously, we triage, we prioritize, we do what we can to manage the sort of waiting lists, but nevertheless it remains. And what National ADAS does from time to time is actually collate information nationally about how different regions are actually faring, so that it can actually support and influence their conversations with national government. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, no, that was really helpful. Thank you, Beverly. And that just gives us that wider look. So focusing in a little bit more on Haringey, when we say there is a strain, which we know there is, are we sort of saying, you know, in the region of about 20% of people that need care assessments might be waiting 18 months rather than a year? I mean, what sort of, when we say strain, what exactly do we mean by this? Have we got any figures for this? Thanks, Beverly.
So what we do have is a system of triage. So it's not that referrals come in and they're not looked at. They are looked at, they're triaged, they're looked at, they're then responded to according to the sort of the critical nature. And obviously safeguarding inquiries are top of the list that, you know, needs to be responded to. But in terms of sort of bog standard assessments for social care, there will be triage and then sort of referred to staff according to that sort of risk matrix. It's very much the same for occupational therapy. And I think we're all clear that there is some capacity issues, again, nationally in terms of occupational therapists. So what we are trying to do is to look to see how we can support assistant OTs and sort of grow our own, as it were. We obviously bring in social workers from agencies to supplement our workload. But again, they are increasingly in short supply. So, I mean, that's the situation. It's an evolving situation that we manage on a really frequent basis, but it does attract a lot of our sort of focus on a daily, weekly basis.
I mean, sorry, Beverly, and this can be a really short answer if we don't have the figures here. I'm just asking this because obviously with waiting lists, we are in the NHS, you know, for hip replacements, we are told, well, it's moved from this amount, say potentially a year to now 3 years or whatever it is. I'm just asking, do we have that? I know you said it's about triaging, etc., and prioritising, but leaving aside that nuanced answer, have we got any understanding how many of our residents are being affected by this and over what period of time extra are they having to wait? And this isn't a criticism, it's just to try and find out, you know, what sort of strain your service is under, you know, and just so we can be aware of that. Thank you.
Yes, there is information, but obviously, as I've said, it's a moving situation as we triage. So I would say, and Jenny, I think you're on the line. I can say that we have a system in place, which means that we're able to look at the referrals that come in. So, and then they are triaged. Now, what we can give you is statistics about what comes in, what is triaged, what is allocated, and then, you know, some approximate times of when they're actually assessed. We do have performance information about that. I mean, normally we would like to have all assessments be completed within 28 days, depending on the complexity, of course, and some of them take longer. But certainly we have some performance stats that we can share with you, just along the lines of that pathway that I've just described.
Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you.
Okay.
And Councillor Connor, if I could just add to that. So when we talk about the triage as well, when we're talking about waiting lists for assessments, with the triage, if there is support that needs to be put in, then that is put in. But what doesn't happen is the full assessment doesn't take place. We put some care in, and then the full assessment, is actually goes onto a list. So we don't leave people without services either, but then they haven't had a full Care Act assessment, say, and therefore they haven't had their finalised support and care and support plan.
Hi, just sorry, can I just ask, when you just join, is it possible just to say who you are and your role, just so that people who might be listening in know who's speaking? Sorry, thank you.
Yeah, sorry, Jenny Plummer, Interim Assistant Director, Adult Social Care.
Lovely, thank you, Jenny. Okay, okay, thanks. Sorry, Charlotte, we were sort of slightly going off, but that was just something that I thought was quite important for us in adults and health.
I'm just
so moving on to page.
further diversion because Councillor Duffner's hand is up as well.
Okay, we are running quite short of time, so Councillor Duffner, if it's key information to give us at this point, that's great. Otherwise, we've got cabinet member questions, which I'm a bit worried we're not going to get to. So I'm just sort of thinking, but obviously do come in now, and then we'll, if you want us to take anything up as cabinet member questions, we can do that as well afterwards.
It was just a really quick point to say that I feel it's probably really important that the committee does have the regular data, and I know historically that's been the case, certainly in scrutiny panels I've sat on, to just each year have that data and have that understanding of where we're at. Beverly's right, it does change, has shifted a lot, and we're seeing a lot of challenges, but just I'm lending my support to that. Really important that Councillor Connor, you and the committee regularly see data and have those updates, because it is available, but and then you can interrogate that a little bit more and have a bit more of a conversation about that.
Thank you. Yeah, so thank you, Councillor Sneves. That was an excellent point, and thank you for making it. We do appreciate the data, because so we can then scrutinise. Okay, thank you. So we're going on to page 3. That's appointment, format choice, support for use of technology, universal contact, community changes, and sharing the backlog. So I think really, Charlotte, just because of time, I think if there's specific areas you want to highlight, we've obviously got the papers in front of us. Yeah. But if there's specific things you want to bring out.
Just to highlight the fact that the last point there, which is share the backlog plan, we've interpreted as sharing data with the Joint Partnership Board as well. So similarly to as Beverly, Jenny and Councillor Dustneves have all said about data coming to this panel, I think the Joint Partnership Board are keen to have some insight into some of the challenges, the volume of cases coming through for assessment and time. So I think that we're looking at what the format for that should be as well. So a similar sort of position, as it were, to the panel in terms of wanting to see in real time what the impacts of some of the delays are on time processes. Otherwise, there's some repetition here in terms of digital inclusion, in terms of double running digital and face-to-face offers, as we've highlighted before. I think just on that point around contacting everyone with a learning difficulty, actually that raises a really interesting question for us, that we don't know everyone with a learning difficulty in the borough. We know people who are part of our HLDP, Haringey Learning Disability Partnership, people who've registered with their GP, for example. They're known to our GPs and they might get an annual health check, but actually a sort of universal register, as it were, of everyone with a learning difficulty was a really interesting conversation about what that would look like and how we'd want that to play through. So I think there's some more work to do on what that would look like, and that's part of that first comment about knowing our community and really being able to communicate effectively with them. So not something that we have, but another area where we're keen to do a bit more thinking about what that would look like and whether that would be relevant. We have a similar model in place for carers, for example, where we have a carers register, but we know that vastly understates the number of informal carers we think we have in the borough. Okay, shall I keep us moving on, Councillor Connor?
Yes, that's fine. Thanks, Charlotte.
Okay, Dominic, if you wouldn't mind. So the next section is on carers and caring. So as you'll know, we already have a carer strategy implementation action group, as has been discussed here before, and these recommendations are being picked up through the ones that are still relevant through the carer strategy work. I think some of these were very specific to the pandemic, so things like supplies of essentials, pharmacy support, check-ins by the council, which were actually given were highlighted in the Living Through Lockdown report as a positive. That I think these are areas which, in a way, because of the pandemic, we now have, should we ever need again to get into sort of mass food delivery, which I'm really hoping we don't need to for reasons of any major crisis hitting the borough. We do have the mechanisms for that. We understand how that could work. We've got some ways of working in place, but a number of these areas were very specific to the pandemic. So I'll probably move on, if that's okay, and move us through. Dominic, do you mind scrolling through to the next section, please?
So, Charlotte, can I just ask a quick question about the carer strategy?
Yes.
Is that coming through? Is that being sort of run by the Bridge Renewal Trust? Have I got that one right?
Yeah, no.
Was that another?
No, we have a carer strategy. We have an implementation plan. It's being very much led by the council, but with stakeholders. We're doing quite a lot of work with the NHS to increase awareness of carers, and I think we had a discussion last time about sort of the work with GPs to raise awareness of carers. So very happy to share more information about that in the future. We have, as you know, a carers reference groups and a number of for the Joint Partnership Board, and a number of carers ways of communicating and engaging with carers overall. So no, I'm not sure the reference to the Bridge Renewal Trust there.
So I was just going to clarify. So the carer strategy, this was developed by the council alongside carers within the Joint Partnership Board. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, it included carers from the carers reference group, but a wider set of carers as well. But yeah, it was developed with carers. Yeah, and the action plan has been drawn up with carers as well.
And who's running the carer strategy as a whole? Is it the council, or because when I was talking to a group of people the other day, they were saying they thought it was being done through the Bridge Renewal Trust, but that I could easily have got that wrong or misheard. So I'm just checking with you.
I think maybe the echo of that is that the Bridge Renewal Trust is currently on an interim basis hosting the Parent Carer Forum for Special Education Needs and Disabilities. I wonder if that's where that line has come from, but they are hosting as that forum gets up and running as a sort of self-standing organisation. But the Bridge Renewal Trust doesn't, run. We do commission a carer support organisation called Carers First, and we do a lot of engagement directly ourselves as the council in implementing our carer strategy. Councillor Dustnerves maybe can shed more light because her hand's up. Over to you, Councillor.
No,
we were struggling to see that.
I just wanted to reassure the panel that I was at a meeting of carers in the borough when we introduced the officer who's actually implementing the action plan associated with the carer strategy. I don't want the panel to have a different impression. So a council officer working with those parents and carers to formulate the action plan and then work on it, monitor it and deliver it. So I just wanted to reassure the panel. I'm not sure where the other, I'm sure Charlotte's right that there's been some mixed message there or confusion. I just wanted to reassure you all.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Dustnerves. No, you're completely right. And Charlotte, that yes, it was the carers strategy or carers something for the education needs for young people with special educational needs. Sorry, so that's where that came from. And I think I was just going to ask, why was there a reason for that cohort to be delivered by the Bridge Renewal Trust, whereas the carer strategy, as Councillor Dustnerves has rightly pointed out, that was sort of delivered straight by the council, if that makes sense? Was there a reason why these two bits were sort of separated out into different organisations to do? Sorry, I can't see whose hand that is. I'm really sorry, I can't see from here.
Councillor
so maybe ask
Dustnerves.
Councillor Dustnerves.
Yeah. Sorry, Councillor Connor. I mean, that really would have been a decision for the partly the children's team delivering on and how they wanted to deliver their work with SEND parents and families going forward. I mean, not really something for us in that sense of it, and also delivering something. There isn't a strategy for that's come to Health and Wellbeing Board on SEND. So I think it's just I think it's not really quite relevant here. Forgive me, I don't mean to be to sound rude. It just would have been a decision that was taken about how they wanted to deliver an engagement.
No, it was just, I was just curious. I mean, it was just. Sorry, I'll just yeah. Sorry, I'll just say this. So it was just curiosity, really, just because carer strategy and then you know SEND and sort of that transitional age. So as those children become older, obviously, and transition to adult services, I was just interested to know why there was two different. Or it seemed to be there was two different organisations involved, but it could, as you've just said, that's obviously the children's decision. So that's fine. It was just, you know, out of interest, really. Okay, thank you. Is there anything else on this that any of the other panel members wanted to ask on that part? No, thank you. Okay, Charlotte, the next page, please.
Thank you. So mental health and wellbeing is the next section. So as we've heard from Chantal and Lynette earlier, some amazing work on bereavement counselling and support. I think it's really strong community bereavement framework was set up. We specifically wanted that to support people across the borough. So I know we did training with the Multi-Faith Forum, with the Voluntary Sector Forum, really tried to ensure the bereavement support was widely accessible. So really important on that. Just on the wider points, I think a number of them are being picked up through areas such as the Great Mental Health Programme, where we're really trying to ensure that we respond at the earliest opportunities to people's mental health and well-being, that we recognise as well the impact of COVID on people's mental health. We are still understanding that, and I think back to Beverly's initial point about iterative processes, we're at very early stages of really understanding how the pandemic has had an effect on all our mental health and well-being. So I think we're still working on this area. We are doing quite significant co-production, as Lynette outlined earlier in the evening. We're doing areas such as at Canning Crescent, obviously involving residents and users in the design of those sorts of services. So I think this is an area where we are doing significant amounts of work beyond what came out through Living Through Lockdown report. But yeah, just the things that were pulled out here are things that we are doing some work on with a range of users. Dominic, do you want to keep going unless there are any questions on that? Okay, so the next section is on Charlotte Howe.
Sorry, Charlotte, can I just ask, is there a reason why we've missed the daycare centres, support for the vulnerable and older carers? Sorry, that was just the page before. I know it's tricky. I'm just saying, are you doing this one at the end? That's 8, 9, 10, and 11.
I think Dominic just clicked it.
It went too quickly. Fine. No, that's fine. I was just, yeah, okay, thank you. Just on that one then, thanks.
Dominic, could you go back? So I think this is, we're in discussing the sort of day provision and home care. So just on home care, we kept a home care service going throughout. There was no break in the service. We actually managed for capacity very well across the system. There were obviously some anxieties from individual users who didn't want people coming from out of the household into the household. But I think it's fair to say that was quite unusual, and we managed pretty much 100% capacity service. On day provision, we're still seeing a reticence and anxiety about users accessing day provision. We're just beginning to pick up figures in the number of centres in terms of capacity. So there was a sort of mix, I guess, where we got to with the group, that it wasn't that it wasn't always the case that day centres were closed and users wanted them to be open. Often users wanted a different offer, maybe some outreach. They certainly wanted information. We've certainly seen calls for respite from carers, but I think it wasn't. I think we've got some more work to do on enabling and encouraging people back into day centre provision. On care homes, clearly that's been a sort of major national issue. I think it's really repositioned care homes in people's minds as sort of part of the community, and we're continuing to do quite significant amount of work with our care homes. And then in terms of some of the information we felt we weren't able to provide, so that was about where, you know, understanding of who had had COVID-19, etc. in our cohorts. Unless people volunteer that to us, that's not information we necessarily know. So we've had a bit of a discussion about how do we work with across the Joint Partnership Board with HLDP to make sure that we are getting the right support out to residents. We actually again had a conversation at CHACAB earlier this week around long COVID, and I think that might be an area where actually making sure that a long COVID offer is, the NHS's long COVID offer is available and accessible to all our residents is something of a challenge that we're working through at the moment. Okay. Are there any questions on that section before?
Yeah, one quick question for myself on the daycare centres and home care facilities. And you rightly pointed out the additional strain on carers and the with people being at home. So, and you've talked a little bit about the carer strategy here, which is useful. So is there anything that the Joint Partnership Board, when you're, with this new panel, that co-production group that you're with at the moment, did they sort of come up with anything that they thought would be, you know, helpful to them, or, you know, that could sort of, you know, support them in any way? Did they come up with any specific asks that you yourselves as sort of officers in the council were looking at and maybe coordinating with other voluntary organisation groups in order to put that extra support in? Obviously this is afterwards, but I mean, anything I suppose that would, you know, help that cohort of people get that extra support. Is there anything that they particularly were asking for?
I mean, I think the main thing is information. So good communication, information, respite, and ideally some sort of outreach or in-reach function, depending how you see it. I think they were particularly concerned about older carers and what support we could get across. It was largely around communication. As I said, this is being picked up through the carer strategy, where there are strands of work about how we better support carers, prevent any caring arrangements breaking down with the adequate support to carers, also recognising when carers need support themselves. So maybe it's, you know, they need to be the cared for one. So we're doing that all sits under the umbrella of the carer strategy, and I think the Joint Partnership Board was working group was happy that this was picked up as in a single place rather than trying to do it here and trying to do it through that carers action plan.
Okay, no, that's useful to know, and I suppose then in the update, I think if we get that section of that carer strategy as part of this the next update, that would be really helpful, because I can see why you're keeping it in one place. That makes complete sense, but it just helps us understand as well. Thank you. Yeah, happy to move on.
Great, thank you. So we've covered mental health and well-being, to housing and sheltered accommodation. I think this was an area around making sure that, I suppose, that they were considered as support places offering support, so things like PPE, making sure that we'd the work on evictions was there. We thought actually there's a wider set of issues around housing and vulnerable residents, and actually so we're proposing that we will have a sort of housing focused discussion at the Joint Partnership Board. We tend to focus on care issues, but obviously the intersection and interface of housing and care is so important. Sheltered housing is a really important element in supporting people, supporting vulnerable residents. And what we've seen is that, you know, things like social isolation, things like getting information quickly is at least better in a sheltered housing situation than it would be for people living completely on their own. So I think our proposal, which was the proposal of the working group, is that we'll agenda this for a joint partnership board for a wider discussion. And actually, very much aware, Councillor Connor, that the panel has been carrying out a review of sheltered accommodation, so it might be interesting to see how that gets fed back into that discussion as well.
Yeah, thank you. We have got questions on sheltered housing, but as it doesn't come up in the joint partnership board's initial living through lockdown, we shall hold those and take them up with you another time. Thank you. Yes, please, Karen. I'm just looking. I'll just check with Ali actually. So I haven't checked in with you for a while. Just make sure that you haven't got any questions, Ali.
No, that's fine. No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Charlotte. Continue. Thanks.
Care homes. So obviously some recommendations. I've just highlighted those earlier. I think. Well, we've got, sorry, Dominic, it's the next set of recommendations in relation to care homes. So this was really about the connections. I think we've improved our communications with care homes. I think one of the real challenges has been the national guidance to care homes, which was did change very, very frequently for obvious reasons, and therefore it was hard for them to keep families fully connected. I think one of the things that's come out of that, and we're certainly working on with our care homes, is about how open they are to the community generally, and how we have that sort of sense that obviously they're people's homes, but that they're also very open to visitors and to family members coming through. This is all sort of shifting now with changed guidance and changed approach, but just recalling how difficult it was to have any contact with family members, and how really challenging that was, both for residents and for their families. In terms of digital support, we both purchased and were given funding through both the NHS and central government for additional devices into care homes, which have been really important in maintaining some of those connections. I suppose one of the things we haven't done is really tested to what extent they're still being used and how valuable they are going forward. But I think that is an area where we do need to look at sort of the digital element of support into care homes.
Thank you, Charlotte. One quick question on this, and it's around the families remaining in touch. So I do know, especially as the more strict versions of lockdown were sort of coming to their end, care homes, obviously, because they're each with a different provider, had different sort of regulations, for want of a better word, in place. And I know that lots of residents contacted myself, and I'm sure they contacted my fellow councillors here, with frustration around, not being able to visit, but they knew that in another care home just down the road, people were being able to visit, and they came to the council to really because I think they thought we would have we would be there to say, oh yes, all are open or all are shut, and obviously that wasn't the case. So was there anything that you specifically drew from that, and that frustration that our residents did have at that point where they really wanted to get back, and then for different reasons some of the care homes weren't able to facilitate that? Were you able at that point to sort of develop that working relationship with those care homes around maybe extra support they needed, or just an understanding? I think so. If hopefully never again, but if it did happen, would we be in a better position as a council to understand, those nuances within the care homes, and would we be able to sort of communicate that well with our residents, or is that something that you think isn't within your gift to be able to do?
Yeah, Will's just put his camera on, so I think he's going to come in here. But I think in the background, so even though the sort of national, the policy was changing and it was national guidance, there were times when there was local discretion, but equally there were times when we had outbreaks and we had to carry out risk assessments for individual care homes, and that was often in the background and probably a little bit separate from what families were seeing. But I'll hand over to Will, who did a huge amount of work with care homes during the pandemic. Will, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. So I did speak earlier, but introduce myself. I'm Will Maris, Director of Public Health. I think what you've said is right, Charlotte, that there was a lot of nuance and there were different contexts in the different care homes, but we we developed a really good relationship with all our major care homes, and we were really trying to support visiting where we could and flexibility, right down to even thinking about the situation of individual residents and visiting situations. So yes, there were certainly different positions for different care homes, but we tried to permit visiting as much as possible within that context. And I think our relationships with the care homes have been strong before the pandemic, but during the pandemic we've definitely strengthened, and some of the partnership working has been really strong. And we have, you know, I'm sure it's the same for Charlotte. We know the care homes more intimately now, and I've got people in my team who know the managers by name and speak to them relatively regularly. So yeah, it's definitely changed our relationship and our appreciation of the sector from the public health point of view.
Thanks, Will. Councillor Bastos also got her in.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point that this was certainly an issue that was coming up, wasn't it, nationally and regionally, and that some care providers did also just take particular perspectives, didn't they? And I think I think the team have highlighted where we feel we can influence, and we have got those good relationships. But there is also that element of, particularly I think some of the chain providers just took a certain perspective on their whole, on their policy for all their care homes. And I know that clearly we saw that with a lot of national coverage of people finding that quite difficult to handle, and because obviously they won't able to see their family members. But I think we've done everything that we can. It's fair, and the team have highlighted that. But I think there are limitations that's brought on a little bit by how the system works and how the care providers view risk as well.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. That's helpful.
Yeah, and I think it is just at the very beginning, that sort of really, really difficult position for care home providers. I mean, their workforce were affected, residents were affected, they were experiencing significant numbers of deaths, and you know, it's just hard to recall almost how tough it was in those first months. But let's move on. Dominic, are you okay to scroll forward? So parks and recreation. So some really interesting points, as I was raising earlier in the introduction, about use of parks, about safety, about how we work together. The council is developing a new parks and open spaces strategy, and we're really keen that the Joint Partnership Board is involved in that. The call to make parks safer is again very interesting, because actually parks had more stewards, had more presence, probably were busier during the pandemic than they probably have been at other times potentially. But we feel it's a really important issue. So this is an area where we've agreed again that we'll engage with the wider Joint Partnership Board. But some really interesting points, I think, around how in a universal system everybody feels able to access that universal offer. So really important sort of questions are being raised as part of this set of recommendations.
Okay, thank you. I think in that whole remit, I think the difficulty, I think, Charlotte, is the bit that we were saying earlier, isn't it, around when guidance was changing and people were trying to sort of navigate what they could and couldn't do. And I think I know that within the carers group that I visited, I think things like, you know, not being allowed to have that table tennis court open, you know, even though they were distanced in the open air and they could bring their own bats. I think there was that sort of, you know, frustration. I completely understand, and this, you're not parks, so I'm not going to sort of, but I think it's about that social well-being, isn't it? People meeting up and getting out in the fresh air. But I think it was, you know, the ability for us to sort of move as quickly as we could, and I think that's down to like financing of getting all that done. Is there anything specifically from this that you would like to pick out and say, okay, so you know, we've heard that, and maybe post-COVID, that we're looking to change something within the parks? You know, I know in Finsbury Park, I think I remember the cases about people asking for disability parking Anyway, it's just things like
Yeah,
that. I'm just wondering if there's anything that you're.
It's exactly those issues. So the safety, so for disabled and older people in parks is a key one. Second, that people feel that the parks are accessible to them. Parking comes up further down, so really important. I mean, I think, you know, that sort of interesting point at 6 about park time for the vulnerable. What does that mean? I think we've got, you know, so those are the key issues. It's largely around safety there, and people feeling comfortable accessing parks and getting the most from them, because exactly as you point out, it's a sort of key sort of underpinning feature of well-being, isn't it? Being able to get out into open spaces and to hopefully feel some fresh air on your face. So absolutely, but those are the key issues. I think in terms of the council's response, it was that sort of weighing of risk, and that first lockdown, we tried to open parks as quickly as possible. There was a short period when they were closed, but I think it was that in the not knowing, how do you balance the risk? And again, it's hard to remember back to that time, but and hopefully we'll, as you point out, we'll never be back in that situation again. But yeah, I think it's the safety point and the accessibility point that we're asking our colleagues to today to work with the Joint Partnership Board on, to make sure that that's the key part of the Parks and Open Spaces strategy.
Thank you, Charlotte. Sorry, yes, moving on. Thank you.
So next is parking. I think during the pandemic, there was this lifting of restrictions on parking and penalty charge notices, and there was a completely different approach to parking, partly because people weren't moving around the borough for obvious reasons. So I think in terms of parking, and I know it's been an issue for the Joint Partnership Board in relation to the changes to parking, so the digitisation of parking tickets, making sure that around low traffic neighbourhoods. So the Joint Partnership Board is actively involved at the moment in working through some of those issues with officers. Moving on to personal budgets and personal assistance, I think this was very much related to PPE, and they were specifically highlighted as a group to whom PPE should be made available. So we work with our personal assistants on that level. And then I think our final area is around food provision, or the final area I'm going to cover today. And just to say on that, so we do have a strong food network, which is supported by a food coordinator, encompasses the food banks and food providers in the borough. We're developing some work on a food strategy, and we'll be developing that with partners going forward. We've got a sort of an approach which has seen us through this sort of welfare element. We're really conscious of the issues around food poverty, really conscious of the issues around health and well-being, and making sure that everybody in the borough can benefit from a healthy diet. Really conscious of affordability and accessibility of good food offers. We've got a really strong community of food growers in the borough. So our food strategy is looking to sort of cover a number of areas and really take these issues forward. But again, that was something raised by the Joint Partnership Board. It was largely around food delivery and making sure that people could access, but actually what's grown out of that the piece of work on food delivery is a much broader sense of the importance of a food poverty or anti-food poverty strategy, which we're working on at the moment. I think that's everything. The
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I think the food poverty bit is the bit that I was going to highlight, as I'm sure my colleagues would have done here. That bit about that forward thinking and what we're now going to be looking at, because we've all known price of heat, electricity, everything is going to be rising hugely, and the pressure on people to heat and to feed themselves is going to be, a lot more stark as we go forward. So I think it's really understanding how, and you're saying that you're working on this at the moment, so that'd be really helpful to get that further update and how people within the joint partnership board and those different carers and mental health service users group, disability groups, really feedback on this and really give you their sort of views on how this is really affecting not just them, but people in the wider community. If there's anything else that the council can be doing, I'm sure as you said, you're working on this, but as I said, that's a key area for us to be looking at and to understand how this could be ongoing, because the fact we're relying on food banks is it's terrible in this day and age, but unfortunately it's the reality. So as part of that, it would just be really helpful to get a further update in September or whenever this comes back to us. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, and we've recently sort of had the Household Support Fund, which is our last sort of set of COVID-related funding, which we're sort of making sure gets out to residents, and that is around food and fuel predominantly, and really quite tight criteria around that. I think the interaction of fuel poverty and food poverty is really important to draw out, which comes back basically to poverty. So really making sure that people have got access to the right benefits and the right as a good level of income as possible to be able to afford it. But yeah, the cost of living index rises are so significant. I think we're going to see more people pushed into fuel and food poverty over the coming months. So that's partly why we're sort of working on not just with the Food Network, but more broadly on this sort of on a more strategic approach, which basically pulls together a lot of what we're doing already, but hopefully we'll add some new elements too.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you for going through that with us. And just to say that from the panel, we note the update. We've made that initial recommendation, haven't we, at the outset about the report being different for next time, and the NHS part, if we could persuade our NHS colleagues if they could provide some input for the next update, that would also be really helpful, as we are doing lots of joint partnership working with them at the moment, as long as with our joint partnership board. So so thank you very much for that report, and we look forward to the next iteration of it with the recommendations that we made at the beginning. But that's all I've got to say for this. Is there anything else you wanted to add? No. Ali, just to check with you before we leave this item.
Yes.
Yes. Is there anything you'd like to add at this point before we leave this item? Okay, lovely. All right, well, thank you. Thank you for presenting the report tonight, Charlotte and Beverly and Will and others who contributed to that. So moving on, we've got the Cabinet member questions. We've got Councillor Neves here to speak to us. Councillor Neves is going to give us a brief update on areas that she thinks is pertinent for us as a panel, as a scrutiny panel, to be aware of, and then we can ask questions after that. So over to you, Councillor Neves. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, I had a really long lot of things to tell you, but I'm feeling that that's probably not so. We haven't got much time, so maybe I'll just give you some of the highlights of that, and you can go straight to questions. I don't want to curb your question time, so to speak. We've covered mental health a bit today, and you'll be aware that it is a really important priority for us. And I'm very proud of what we did for Great Mental Health Day, but you've quite rightly highlighted, there's plenty more, and there are a whole raft of other things that we're working on. But I did want to just cite you all on Canning Crescent, which is due to open maybe June, July. I recently had a site visit. I'm really looking forward to seeing that being open with more bed spaces for people in crisis, that the community cafe, the safe haven run by Mind, and then Clarendon Recovery College also being there. It's a beautiful and light space, and I think in a really accessible location. So I think it's fair to say everyone's really looking forward to seeing that service be, and it speaks a little bit to what Councillor Blake was saying about having that presence in the community and something available. It doesn't answer all of those issues, but it will certainly make a contribution to that. So just wanted to highlight that. I think it's really important. You'll have been really well cited on all our work COVID wise, and there's been so much of it. But I guess I wanted to just highlight that for us, we're into a new phase, and it's something that Will can speak to much more than me. Of course, that a lot of that funding from government will drop away, and what we're doing as an organisation, I suppose, is looking at that learning, particularly that we know that we have had low vaccination rates amongst some members of our community, and I think that's been discussed before, but certainly at Scrutiny. But what we're doing is we've identified that is also related not only to perhaps a bit of concern about vaccines and some fears and some of the misinformation people may have had, but also is really linked to some of the challenges people have in connecting and trusting health generally and accessing health services. So we've been thinking about what we do to increase our outreach, which will enable people to have better access to services, those usual health checks that you might expect, and at the same time perhaps be able to have a conversation about vaccination. So we've been talking a bit about that, and that's something that I think is quite important as we go forward, part of that learning and taking that learning forward in our community. There's been a lot of work on health and care integration, making sense of 3 different bits of legislation / guidance, and what are, in essence, looking at what our integrated care, our borough care partnership will look like, and that's still a work in progress, but you'll be aware that ICS and etc. start in July. So but there isn't a particular we're still developing what our system will look like. That's not unusual. We're still waiting for some of the final guidance, some of the final decisions from government, but what we have built is a really solid base of partnership and vision around what we think that our partnership is around, and that really focuses on people living well and defining what that living well means, and in particular the particular focus on inequalities and inequality of outcome, and making sure that we are tackling those issues and actually really thinking about what residents would tell us about what the answers are. So we have put the voice of residents and thinking about how, when it's right to do so, we co-design and co-produce and work together, which in my view is most of the time, but also we have a whole vast variety of partners with different levels of experience, and even within our own area of work, which is of adults, we have a range of different ways of doing co-production and a range of different experiences. So we're trying to bring that into that partnership. So that's a watch this space long journey. Beverly referenced earlier the place-based hubs. I'm really excited about this piece of work. I think bringing us and our presence into the community in place is really vital. I think we've lost that over time. I think austerity cuts and other kinds of changes impacted on us and changed that vision, but actually as I think many people probably said back in that time, we shouldn't lose it because we'll go back to it, and we are. But I think it's a positive story. We've got our first hub, Northumberland Park, under development in the Neighbourhood Resource Centre there. And what we're currently doing is talking to the community about what they'd like to see. But what we know will be there will be council staff. We know there will be health services there, and it will function in that way of providing a space in which people can come into and seek help and seek information. We talked a bit about communications, and that's definitely an area that needs improvement. But the important thing, I think, for me as well about Northumberland Park hub is that it's also an opportunity to learn. So we'll learn from that experience, and then we'll go on to develop more across the borough. And hopefully it's obvious why that particular location was chosen. It's really based on the need that we see, and indices of deprivation as well, of course. Violence against women and girls is a really significant and important priority for us. You'll be aware that we have increased and made a commitment to increase the funding of 600k. That's in recognition both of the scale of the issue. I mean, in London we've seen domestic abuse increase by 40% during the pandemic, so we're aware of that. We also have the the Domestic Abuse Act, what we need to respond to, that changes our duties, increases our duties. So that's very much a focus for us at the moment. How do we respond to that? I think we're also working quite closely, myself with my colleagues, Councillor Doan and Councillor Carter, on women's safety at night. We did a survey. We weren't successful in achieving Home Office funding, but nevertheless, we're working on how can we tackle some of the issues that women have raised there. And in fact, tomorrow evening, I'm going to go and walk around Finsbury Park with residents and councillors and officers to discuss some of the measures we might be implementing quite soon on lighting and surveillance generally there. And we'll need to do more on that. So, but there's plenty. We're plenty focused on what's a clear priority for residents and the community. Looking down, so because I'm realising we don't have too much time. AIDS and adaptations. It's a really difficult and challenging area for us, and has been for many years, I'm told, by other councillors who've much more experience than I. We're redoubling our efforts in this area. It's also been affected by the pandemic, and we're investing in resources to get the service to where we want it to be. We're working with some residents on what those improvements should look like. So it's a form of co-production where they're suggesting some really good and simple, I think Beverly said it, it's really good and simple ideas that can just make things work better. And communications comes up a lot. Absolutely it does, and we need to do better, and we know that. So we're working on that, and part of that's about resource. There are also issues with occupational therapy and surveyors, and we're looking at how we can better resource that. There are shortages of those professionals, and that's a London and even national problem. But we are focused on it. I'm very focused on it because I know it's an area of real concern, and it has a lot of impact for residents. So that's one where what I'm pleased is that we're focused on working on something that is difficult and that we haven't always got right, and we're acknowledging that. Looking down, there's quite a lot of work going on with integration with Homes for Haringey. And both I suppose there's things to look at on both the supported housing and perhaps domestic abuse, and the synergies between health and care and the services that are within Homes for Haringey. So that's a significant project for us and a bit of a watch this space. So these are all things that we might come back to you in the future to talk to you about. Looking through, have I missed any highlights? Our capital projects, we've got a big capital programme at Bourgogne Road. We're providing support at the moment for women who've experienced homelessness and rough sleeping. And Bourgogne Road will have a role in supporting women who've experienced domestic abuse going forward. We're just working on that next phase, but we've worked really quite closely with residents, and it's a really good example of a building that was in public use. It was a health centre, and we as the council have taken it on and retained it and kept it for the benefit of our community. And I think local residents appreciate that, and also appreciate the close working with us. I've mentioned Canning Crescent, which is a significant capital project. Osborne Grove continues, the co-design, the co-production, and some of the feedback I've had from residents who are on that group is that they feel that it really is gold standard of co-production. So I think we'll be looking to that project for lots of learning and also lots of tools and techniques of how we take that co-production forward. I know Councillor Culverwell has attended many an Osborne Grove meeting, so he could tell you about that another time. And we're at the sort of planning submission preparation stage on that project. So that's a really exciting piece of work. Chad Gordon campus obviously launched. We've got about 18 people, I think. The officers will correct me if my figures are wrong, attending Haringey, actually Haringey, forgive me. And we've got about 6 in the space for people with learning disability and autism. We've seen quite a reluctance for some people to return to building-based support and input for a whole range of reasons. And we're very conscious and aware of that because we talked before about the strain on carers. So on the one hand, there's great strain and the need for that support. On the other, reluctance to be in spaces because of COVID in many ways. There might be other factors too, but I think what that requires is some close work and efforts in assessing need, understanding concerns, building confidence, and making a plan for each individual. And we've been working on that with some individuals who were in receipt of services, making that really close plan on what works for the individual who needs the support and the family. So that's ongoing. And you'll be aware 57 White Hart Lane, which is a project with the NHS to provide support and care for young people in the borough. We've signed that off and it's now in a really early stage of development. And what that will mean when it's complete is that we are providing services for young people who might otherwise, who've got very complex need and might have had to leave the borough, which is really not what families want. And it means that we can maximise, we've got some good services for those young people already in the borough. We can use those and they can be close to their family, but whilst having the separateness that is needed for their needs too, in a bespoke, well-designed, and that will be peer-designed space. So that's some of the things that we've been up to, and I guess I was going to just pick on a few highlights, things that are coming up, which is the ongoing mental health programme, ongoing work on VORG, I think ongoing work on carers and on workforce for us, and those are both important areas. And ongoing work on collaboration and communication and co-production. It's not, I think Beverly used the word iterative. It's a different way to work than perhaps some institutions and organisations work. It's not you do this piece of work and then that's it, and then it ends and here's the result, but here's this wonderful project because people told us this. Of course there might be projects that come out of people's feedback. It's really about a learning journey where we're changing our culture and changing how we think and how we respond to people. But that's quite a long journey, and we don't. It's not that we're built with all those tools and techniques and skills there ready. Actually, we're developing them and building them, and there'll be different pockets of the service who are evolving at different rates. So that's an ongoing journey, and the team all know I want to go deeper and have more residents involved in ongoing governance of our work as well. And I think, food. I just wanted to mention food. One of my priorities ongoing, we've talked about the importance. Haringey is quite a foodie borough, and at the same time, we've talked about the issues of food poverty. So I think there are other parts of Cabinet looking at celebrating food and our connections between our communities and food. And in this part of work, I think we need to look at going beyond food banks and looking at things like community supermarkets, looking at how we can build sustainable models that help people feed people in an affordable fashion. So those are some things that we'll be looking at in future. And that was a whistle-stop tour. I'm sorry, I've got loads more that I could say, but I've edited myself back. So over to questions.
Great, thank you, Councillor Snebs. Okay, there was an awful lot in that. So I'm going to ask Councillor Caldwell first, and then Councillor Blake, and then Ali, if there's any questions they would like to pose. So I'll start with you, Councillor Caldwell.
Thank you. That was very informative, actually, and very encouraging to see how much we're doing. In the areas that you're talking about, which do you feel needs our support more than anything else?
Do you mean from a scrutiny point of view?
Sorry, yes.
Okay. Well, I think my comment around following the data that I made earlier, I think it'd be really good to make sure that you're seeing our data regularly and talking to us about that and interrogating that. I might not get thanks. I might not get thanks for that comment, but I think truly I'm very passionate about this portfolio. I'm also very passionate about scrutiny. Everyone knows that. So I'd say that following the data and following that journey with us and talking to us about why what is happening is really important. And I'm always really concerned that when I go out in the borough, and I go out a lot and talk about what we're doing, that we don't celebrate enough of the good things that we do, and also people don't understand a lot of the details, the pressures and the issues and the whys of where we are. I've heard in Hackney they ran a session, I've told the team this, ran a session called Why is Adults Always Overspent? And that's and what it really doing is delving into the pressures that are in adult social care and the challenges that we face in delivering services with the kind of funding models that we're often dealing with. So that is that helpful?
Thank you very much. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Blake. Good questions. Okay, Ali, I'm just going to check with you. If you've got a question for the cabinet member.
Yes, a couple of questions actually, if I may. First one is, have you got these services back into regular, I don't know, working, i.e. Unlike the COVID period? And the second one on AIDS and adaptations. Do we have any statistics how long it takes for an adaptation to be put in place between the time of application and the actual implementation? Thank you.
Thanks for those questions. I'll do a little bit and then I'll ask officers to come in if that's okay on some of it. In the terms of back into regular working, I know what you mean, although I think actually a lot of our services have worked throughout and carried on. I know what you're getting at. And are things in person available? Yes. I think that's right. I think, and what I just described was that some of our service users, residents, I like to call them, are still having a little bit of reluctance about coming in and being in person. But actually our workers, our staff worked throughout in the same way that they had before. I suppose what has impacted us a lot is the fact that we're seeing different needs and different level of demand, more demand in actual fact. So in a way, and we're still dealing with some of the backlog as well, I would say, in some of the cases. But I don't know, Beverly, if you wanted to come in on anything more specific.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Mr. Ali. So basically, and Jenny can correct me if I'm wrong, to my recollection, it can take a standard 12 months for an adaptation, a major adaptation to be completed. This is pre-COVID times. Now we know that there are significant challenges, as with the rest of sort of supply and demand issues with supplies at present. So very often we are disappointed in terms of being able to complete major adaptations within those kind of guidelines. Unfortunately, I think it's a situation that's going to stay with us just because of the context in which we work in at present. But I think and I think Councillor Desnev said it earlier, what we really need to improve on is to keep our residents, our families informed every step of the way. There's nothing worse than not hearing back from us about the state or the progress of things. And very often it's outside of our control. Really recently, we had a date for an implementation of a major adaptation. The supplier let us down at the last minute. I mean, that kind of thing can be crushing for families. But unfortunately, it's something that we know that will happen time and time and again, just because of the context and the whole sort of post-COVID supply and demand issues. But it's a challenging area. We are really committed, myself, together with Councillor Desneves and the team, to really work on improvements as far as they're within our control, and to call for help and support across the piece. We're currently looking at the best performing boroughs in London to look to see how we can learn from them going forward. So it is very much work in progress, but we know it's a challenging task ahead. But we're very much gearing up to address those challenges. I hope that answers your question. Jenny, did you want to add anything? Sorry.
Hi, yeah. No, I think the only thing that I would add in terms of talking about how long it takes, that's right, about 12 months. But one of the other things that we're doing as well is we're trying to break down the process so we can actually maybe identify how long it takes for an OT, how long it takes for a surveyor, how long it takes for the contractors, so we can maybe focus down into what the issues are, because it's quite a complex process. So what we're hoping is by doing that, we can focus down into what the specific areas, specific issues are around that part of the process. So we have started doing that and working with our performance team to gather some of this information about how long it takes and what the issues are that are causing us so we can overall shorten the process, although some of the actual processes we kind of we don't have much control over, but we can, and also as Beverly was saying, looking at some of the best performing boroughs, we've actually went to another borough and looked at how they manage their surveyors, and we're bringing that in line because we thought that was a good way of shortening the process as well. So it is a working process, but we are looking at how we can actually break it down and identify various sections along the process.
Okay, Ali, is that fine? Do you want to ask anything now you've heard the answers? Do you want to ask a follow-up?
Not a follow-up, but definitely on observation. The communication, well, between the individuals and the council really must improve. You know, if they are informed of the progress, the length of time till the implementation, whether it is 12 months or 18 months, shouldn't make, well, it does make difference, but it should put their mind at ease, if you know what I mean. But
Yes,
otherwise,
absolutely.
yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's really helpful. Thank you for saying that. I think you're right. I think you're spot on.
Okay, Ali, I'm just checking with you. Was that the last bit you wanted to raise, or?
Well, it's an observation. Sorry. Echo.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
I'm getting my voice back.
Oh, that's really annoying. Okay, and well, that's a very helpful observation. Actually, I think we would all echo that here. So, talking about your echo. Okay, so I'll move. I think Councillor Blake had a follow-up question actually from that when we went to Councillor Blake.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, obviously, yeah, I mean, thanks to officers for their honest appraisal of the situation. I think what would be helpful, maybe, I'm not demanding this now, but maybe for a future meeting, is if we could get an idea in terms of that 12-month period, whether that was the same sort of pre-lockdown, pre-COVID, I'm sorry, because obviously we've had lots of issues since, you know, COVID related, but also Brexit related in terms of supplies, etc. And you know, anybody's had anything to do with the building trade or whatever, you're trying to get a new kitchen or anything like that, you've become all too familiar with this. But it would just be useful just to know what the situation was sort of 2018, 2019 in relation to where it is now. And also another aspect of this I'm quite interested in is our use of contractors and suppliers. Are we leaning towards local suppliers and contractors, and you know, what the evidence is from other boroughs with regards to those issues? I don't expect an answer now, but maybe at some future date we could get that. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Blake, for the question. I was just going to acknowledge it and just confirm that we will get you the sort of pre-COVID and current sort of time scales. In terms of the procurement, we can sort of partially answer it. We use the DPS system, the dynamic purchasing system, which is the sort of the council system to go on and get contractors. Charlotte, do you want to come in on terms of the local nature of those that range?
Yeah. I think it does vary on the size and specialism of what's required. So whether we can source that locally or not. A number of our suppliers on the DPS are small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs as they're known, locally. So we are interested in developing that for community wealth building reasons, as you'll appreciate, Councillor Blake. But I think it does, yeah, as I say, it depends on the scale of the works and also the what specialisms are required to deliver them. Thanks.
Sorry, just a very quick follow-up on that. Again, not an answer now, but you spoke about learning best practice lessons from other boroughs. Are we looking at collaboration with other boroughs, which would be, you know, pretty obvious next step? Cheers.
So we're not necessarily looking at collaboration, or that's something we can take away, Councillor Blake. What we have identified is a borough who has a much improved performance outcomes in terms of the speed of adaptations and the general sort of resident satisfaction. And we, as Jenny has said, we visited them. It's fair to note that they've got more significant supply sources for surveyors. You know, we've got a couple, they've got 12, but I understand there's a way that that is shared across sort of the private public sector, if my memory serves me right. But certainly that's how that borough operates. So we will take, you know, the learning and obviously look to see what is appropriate for Haringey going forward. Thanks.
I want to just come in and say that we are in a consortium on, and Charlotte might want to say a little bit more about this, on the equipment, because obviously it's highly specialised type of kit generally, and often then further adapted to each individual. So when we've just been, I say it just because we've been looking at that at the moment and the renewal of that contract, but I don't know if you want to say a bit more about that, Charlotte.
Yeah, thank you. And I suppose, yeah, so we'll work with other London authorities, so we definitely collaborate on that contract, which does allow us to have a full range of specialised equipment and to bring down costs. I think it's fair to say, and I think it was you, Councillor Blake, raised the point about Brexit in terms of supplies. So we've seen additional costs on that contract from things like Brexit, impact on freight and shipping costs, the sort of general inflation picture that we're seeing at the moment as well. So it's fair to say all that sort of wider economic picture feeds into that contract, given some of those specialist equipment comes from all over the world in effect. And we are seeing increased demand on that contract as well. So as well as sort of the performance on time, just a recognition that there is increased activity on that contract and increased demand. So that's playing through to the occupational therapists that you heard about. Sometimes it's about these large adaptations, and sometimes it's more about getting fitted for equipment and sort of things that are sort of easier to adjust, but they still need a full occupational therapist assessment. So quite significant additional demand and activity on that contract. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I'll ask a couple of questions. So when we did budget scrutiny, it seems a long time ago now, back in December in Adults and Health, we noted that the base budget was decreasing for this next financial year. And given all the issues and concerns that have been raised tonight and in conversations with you in the past, Councillor Neves, around the increased needs and service needs for our residents. Is this something that is going to be able to be looked at so that we don't start the next financial year with less money than we have currently? So that's my first question. The second one was around, and you said about violence against women and girls, and I know we've had a conversation about some interesting work around sort of going into secondary schools and having conversations with those young people. I just wondered if there's anything that we could just draw out and raise here, because I think that was a really innovative bit of work, but it's around that sort of ongoing funding for initiatives like that. We just heard about that mental health initiative, and it had a 1-year funding. So is there any sort of funding break for this work in schools? And then the last one was around sheltered housing, and as a scrutiny committee we've been into some of the sheltered housing recently in the borough, and we had some real concerns around the evidence that we were presented with different cohorts of residents being in a situation whereby they were telling us that people with very high-end needs that were being placed in that sheltered housing were having, they didn't feel that they were getting the support they needed to be safe within that sheltered housing. And I'm just wondering if that's something that is, that yourself as a cabinet member could be looking at and sort of, because obviously we want to support everybody within the sheltered housing accommodation and make sure that everyone is happy and sort of supported in that. And then one final thing, sorry, I know we touched on it earlier about mental health support for young people in the borough as a whole, but I would just reiterate that concern that I do have about secondary school and primary school support for children with mental health needs across the entire borough. And as I said, we'll be raising that at JOSC as well around the mental health community review, because we do obviously want to push for that, and I just like your thoughts on that. So that was 4 questions, and then that's my final lot. Thank you.
Thank you. All really good ones and really good points. And I'm really grateful to you as well, because you've just covered some things that I self-censored and cut out of my long spiel. So we'll come back to some of those things that I did want to tell you about. On the budget, well, I mean, it's challenging, isn't it? Because actually since December, what we were all anticipating 5% inflation, weren't we, in December? And now what we're looking at going forward might be 7%. So much is shifting and changing, and you're right, into a direction that isn't one we want it to go in either. But we have put an extra £6 million into this budget, which is a recognition of the huge increased need and growth and that we're anticipating. Can I tell you that I think it's definitely enough? I think it would be wrong of me to say that, because actually what we're looking at, and actually in December we didn't think there was going to be a war in Europe either, although maybe some people did already have that intelligence, and those things do have knock-on effects and ripples, and actually Councillor Blake highlighted some of those Brexit ripples, pandemic ripples we've already seen. So, but we have put that £6 million in there. That is a large commitment, and I know there's been a large commitment into children's as well. Just recognising that we don't start in a bad way. But I think we could come back to you with a written answer, or I don't know if anyone wants to come in on, any of the officers want to come in on this topic at all before I move on to the next question.
Just to agree with you, Councillor Desnez, you've got it absolutely right. There has been an additional £6 million growth into the adult social care budget for the coming year. I'm not quite sure where the observation of a reduction came from, but certainly. So
let's commit then to just making sure we come back with a written response on that as well.
Yeah, sure.
Please, just to make sure we're clear on that. VORG and secondary school. So this is a bit I missed on telling you, which is we have been focusing, and you're right, that the budgets are an issue. And also one of the other issues, and I've been talking to Councillor Brabazon about this, is also about schools' ability, and Will and I talked about this as well, schools' ability to manage new things when they've been going through the pandemic. And it's easy to forget that actually just a few months ago, in my daughter's school, and I'm sure it's true across, a good proportion of teachers were off sick, a good proportion of children were out of school. Managing all that has been really challenging. But we do have a programme that has been working with, because there is healthy relationship education, I believe it's called, and we've been working with trying to influence that. And obviously with some schools we have greater influence as they're under their local authority schools, and others less so where they're academies and other types of format and structure, if you like. So we have been looking at that. One of the exciting other pieces of work we've been doing is we're working with some young people who are working on a campaign around violence against women and girls, and in particular challenging some of this victim blaming and unpleasant victim blaming that leads to really poor outcomes, in both in reporting and in women's ability to challenge some of the things that are happening. And we've got some great local young people producing some videos, some to challenge professionals, some produced with content from boys, speaking to boys, and then a video for girls. I think that'll be a really interesting and exciting piece of work that is really focused on communicating some of those messages that we might have, and we're looking at how we might use that also through schools. And you're right, we will need to look at how we can do more in schools, but we're also being really conscious, and it's something that Councillor Brabazon and I were talking about, just to talk conscious of the tolerance of being able to cope right now with more. But and we've got some active campaigners in the community who are really interested in supporting that work too, so that's really positive. So it's on the agenda, you're quite right. The sheltered housing concerns, they have been raised with me, and you're quite right, we need to make sure that everybody feels safe and that everybody's needs are being met, and what I'd like to do is for us to come back to the panel with a written response on that, because we're looking and reviewing across the piece just what exactly is taking place and what the challenges are and what the issues are. So perhaps we could come back to you on a written response on that one, but I don't know if any officers want to come in on that just generally.
Yeah, and thanks, Councillor Dustnose, and thank you, Councillor Connor. So we will come back with a written response, but I guess generally, I suppose the point I was raising in relation to sheltered housing before is that sheltered housing is such, it is a really great offer, because for residents who wouldn't otherwise have that sort of initial safety net, it's really important that they do have that. We do see residents with more complex needs, and then it is about calling on other partner services, but it's then that added certainty that they are in a safe place, they are being responded to. So I think really important that we remember the sort of core service offer and how vital that is, how fundamental. I think we have got some work to do on how, whether there is scope for designation of particular schemes for particular sets of needs. So I think we've got some more conversations to have around that internally, and then we can share that back with you. But we've had some interesting thoughts on that. Thanks, Councillor.
Thanks, so that's really useful. And then on mental health and young people, and it won't surprise you, I completely agree with you. Of course, this is a really important focus. I know schools are doing things. There are even just small initiatives, but what I'll commit to doing is just picking it up with Councillor Brabazon, obviously very much at her portfolio, and just having that conversation, but also really conscious and aware that what you've raised here as well is that transitions piece, and when young people they're transitioning into adulthood, and they might well be being supported by us in adult services as well, and noted on the mental health. So we'll definitely come back to you on that in writing, but I'll raise it with Councillor Brabazon as well on just generally but I do know there are initiatives and all sorts of things, from healthy shared breakfasts together and lots of talk. I know that some schools have been circulating, for instance, particular materials for families and parents to talk about the war in Ukraine, and to help manage and support their young people who might already have some anxiety related to the pandemic and other factors. But then something like this can also be distressing and disruptive and disturbing. So they're definitely doing things, and I'll raise it with Councillor Brabazon that it came up today. That's okay.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, just Councillor Blake wanted to come back in on, I think, sheltered housing very quickly. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a bit of feedback from the consultation visit that I attended, that there was a sense from the residents that we spoke to that the criteria for sheltered housing had sort of changed, and it was, done by stealth, really. And I think I just want sort of clarity in terms of that written response, in terms of, what's the basis that people access sheltered housing? Because there was a sense that it should be around supporting people who can live independently, might need some low-level support to live independently for longer. But there was a kind of sense I got from the meeting that we had a lot of high needs people now, and that group were the priority. And that, for me, that really is the nub of it, because that really kind of changes the whole ethos, I think, in terms of certainly what my view used to be of what sheltered housing was about. So I think if that question could be addressed in the response, that would be really, really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, of course,
Well,
Councillor Blake will mention.
Okay, well, thank you, and thank you very much for everyone's time tonight. So I would just say thank you, Councillor Neves, for the question and answer session. But I think that's it from us. I don't think we've got any further questions to ask, and keeping in mind, obviously, the time, don't like to overrun too much. So thank you to everyone on the call this evening. So we're going to conclude the Cabinet Member questions. And we're going to take number 10, new items of urgent business. Any? No.
Yes, we have. We'll need to just formally approve the minutes, given that we weren't quorum at the time when we took the minutes originally.
Yes. Oh, can you just all formally approve? Agreed. Yes, that was, yeah, okay.
It's a bit of red tape there, sorry.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so again, thank you to everyone. And yes, it's been a really useful session today. So thank you ever so much for everyone to coming along. And good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Right.